Channel. In the previous two videos I showed you my the camper van which I finished making, and also I showed you my Sylvanian barge boat and my Sylvanian pleasure boat. For some reason the comments section was disabled for those two videos, and I don't know how to turn the comments back on. I have a feeling it might be because YouTube automatically does that for videos it deems to be for kids, even though obviously those videos weren't for kids, but because they were showing things that are like kid themes, like Sylvanian families and things, YouTube might have automatically, they obviously have some automatic thing where they shut down comments for those types of videos. Obviously my channel isn't aimed at kids, but YouTube sort of does it automatically, and I'm not sure how to turn my comments back on. So if you do want to reply to those other two videos, feel free to comment on this video, which will hopefully have the comments section. But I would like to show you some more of my Sylvanian collection at another date, because I've got the doll's house, it's a Sylvanian lodge. So I've got one of the doll's houses, the Sylvanian lodge, and it's got a rabbit in there, but I've recently ordered off eBay a good bargain actually for £10, because the figures are very expensive. So to get two for £10, two figures is pretty good. It's pretty reasonable, considering that for whole families you're often paying upwards of £20, which is why I prefer to get the figures individually, because they're, because I don't necessarily want like whole families. The squirrel family I've got came with a caravan, so that came as part of the package. I'll try and show you the caravan maybe in another video at some point. But yeah, I think I've probably got enough figures for now. I feel like quite complete. I just wanted to get the chocolate rabbit to go with the other cottontail rabbit I've got, because they can make a twosome, and they can both live in a cottage, the lodge. And I've also got getting the cat, one of the cats, which came with the rabbit, in a seaside set where you get two, so two for £10. So another was slightly less than £10 actually, so it's £4 something per. It's a bit less than £10, so it'll be, I can't do the maths, it'll be almost £5 per figure, which isn't too bad, considering that normally they're really expensive. Okay, so so in this video I want to carry on really from where I left off when I was talking about self-diagnosis, just to clarify a few issues really, because I sometimes feel possibly some of the things I say could be misconstrued. So I just want to try my best to clarify some of the issues. Now I know in some of the comments it was suggested that the issue of people who self-diagnose as autistic not being believed, and that it is similar to, say, not believing someone who is a victim of crime, but whose victimhood, if you like, has not yet been verified by a court of law or whatever, and them feeling misunderstood and so on. Now I completely agree that obviously a victim of crime, regardless of whether or not they've had that legally established or not, it needs to be understood, needs to be empathised with, and it needs to be kind of accepted. What they say needs to be taken as fact, if you like. It needs to be accepted. But yes, they're a victim of crime, regardless of whether or not this has yet been verified or not. But I did feel that this was rather a false analogy to make in comparison with autism. The same goes with poverty, and obviously you don't go to a doctor to diagnose poverty. So I do feel it's a bit of a different scenario, and it's not really a very, in my opinion, it's rather a false analogy there. But the one thing I'd like to say is that a victim of crime knows themselves what happened. Say for the sake of argument, I don't know, they were violently assaulted. To them, they know that happened. Obviously they then have to persuade others that this happened, and one would hope that people are understanding and treat what they say seriously, essentially, and not diminish it or anything, regardless of whether or not this has yet been established as fact or not. And we would hope that they're not lying, for example. So you'd normally have to kind of take them, trust what they say, essentially. Obviously, it has to go through the court of law because the person who's committed the violent assault or whatever has to be proven innocent or guilty. But regardless, the person who's claiming they're a victim of crime needs to be taken seriously, and it needs to be it needs to be treated as if they were a victim of crime, regardless of whether or not this has yet been actually verified. And I would hope that that's what happens. Obviously, it doesn't always happen, sadly, but it should. But like I said, a person who's a victim of crime knows themselves whether or not they were a victim of crime or not. Obviously, other people might need to be convinced, but like I said before, I would say that it's important to treat what they say seriously and to assume that what they're saying is correct. But the person who's a victim of crime knows what happened. This is different to autism. First of all, of course, autism is a medical condition. Being a victim of crime has got nothing to do with, it's not something you go to a doctor to be diagnosed with. It's a separate entity completely, which is why I think the analogy is false. And the issue here is that an autistic person, someone whose autism hasn't yet been diagnosed, so actually I should say someone who might be autistic, so we don't yet know that they're autistic, so it hasn't yet been diagnosed, but who has very strong suspicions that they might be autistic, who are even maybe very certain that they might be autistic. This person does not yet have the knowledge to know whether or not they are autistic, whereas a person who's a victim of crime has that knowledge themselves that it either happened or it didn't happen. Obviously, if they're claiming they're a victim of crime, we would assume that, 100% they know that it happened. They know they're a victim of crime. There's an objective fact here that the person themselves knows, unless they're deluded or something, but assuming they're not deluded, they know what happened. Whereas a person who's thinking that they might be autistic does not know that they're autistic until they've got it diagnosed. So that's the other issue, but like I said, it's a false analogy because autism's a medical condition, so you're not comparing like with like. I suppose a better analogy, although an imperfect one, and it is imperfect, but one that's a bit closer to autism, would be looking at a physical condition, which is also medical. Autism, of course, is different to say, although autism is physical because it affects your brain, but it's different to say a condition like diabetes, for example. Now, this analogy here is not an exact one. It's an imperfect analogy, but I would say it's probably... Yeah, I mean, it's an imperfect analogy, but we are still comparing similar categories in the sense they're both medical conditions, but medical for different reasons. And obviously, it is an imperfect analogy because someone whose diabetes is untreated could essentially die or have really serious consequences, whereas a person who's not diagnosed with autism also might have very serious consequences, but it's not quite the same thing. But say for the sake of argument, someone self-diagnosed themselves with diabetes. They thought that their symptoms were diabetes, so they tried to change their diet and everything. They didn't go to a doctor. Oh no, we're not going to go to a doctor, we're just going to self-diagnose themselves with diabetes. Had all the classic symptoms, maybe, extreme thirst. Someone needed to go to the toilet, maybe had lost weight and were feeling very tired and so on. But actually they had cancer, which can also cause some of those symptoms. So, yeah, I mean, it's an imperfect analogy, but I would say it goes to show how self-diagnosis can be very dangerous. Now, obviously, autism is completely different to cancer and diabetes. Being autistic is you're not going to die. You don't have a disease, essentially. So it's an imperfect analogy because those two things, diabetes. I suppose a closer analogy still, one which is psychiatric, would be schizophrenia. Would you self-diagnose yourself with schizophrenia? I'll leave that to you to decide. Would you self-diagnose yourselves with schizophrenia? I'll leave that to you to decide. Would you self-diagnose yourself with dementia? I'll leave that to you to decide. These are imperfect analogies, but closer, I would say, to comparing self-diagnosis to, say, someone not being believed who reports that they've been a victim of crime. So I just wanted to clear that up. The other thing is that, to me, it comes down to logical syllogisms. Okay, so what I mean by that is, it follows. It's a logical syllogism. So medical conditions, like autism, need to be diagnosed by a doctor. Medical conditions need to be diagnosed by a doctor. because otherwise they wouldn't be medical, would they? You don't go to a doctor to be diagnosed as gay, for example. I know in the olden days, being gay was considered to be a medical condition and pathologised and so on, but obviously that was down to deep-seated homophobia, and we now, hopefully, most people know differently. You don't go to a doctor to be diagnosed as gay because there's nothing wrong with you. It's not a medical condition. But medical conditions, you need to go to a doctor to be diagnosed. Autism is a medical condition. Therefore, you need to go to a doctor to be diagnosed. It's a logical syllogism. Now, the other thing I'd like to clear up is about implying that people who self-diagnose as autistic, I'm claiming are charlatans or imposters. I never actually said that they were charlatans or imposters. That's sort of putting words into my mouth. What I did say was that they were being dishonest. And what I mean by that is that it is being dishonest if you claim to have something when you do not have full knowledge that something is the case. That's being dishonest. Because you're kind of, to use a metaphor, you're sort of jumping the gun and you're claiming something, you're claiming you have prior knowledge about something before that's actually been confirmed. And sometimes things do need to be confirmed. So I didn't say that they were charlatans or imposters, and they might well be autistic, by the way. That, you know, I'm not saying they're not autistic either, because they might be autistic. But at this point in time, unlike a victim of crime who knows categorically whether or not whatever happened to them, the person who's considering whether or not they're autistic doesn't yet know for sure. That's one of the main differences there as well. Aside from the fact autism is a medical condition, being a victim of crime is not a medical condition, just as poverty is not a medical condition, so that's why I said it was a false analogy. So, yeah, obviously someone who thinks that they might be autistic, because obviously, you know, we've all been there, everyone who's been diagnosed as autistic was once in that rather lonely situation of thinking they might be autistic, and then obviously you have to go down the difficult route of going to get assessed and everything like that, because that's the done thing. You know, you can't just claim a diagnosis, you have to have it confirmed through the, proper channels. So we've all been in that situation, and it's important to try and remember what that's like, and obviously to support and encourage and help people who think that they might be autistic. Because even if they turn out not to be autistic, the fact of the matter is they obviously have some difficulties, or they would not be thinking, you know, along those lines. So you have to sort of meet them where they're at, you know, help them, you know, what their difficulties are, make adjustments for them and so on, regardless of whether or not they've yet got the diagnosis. And even if they end up without a diagnosis, those challenges they have will still be there and still need to be supported. They might have another condition similar to autism, like ADHD, for example, which only a doctor can really determine. So I never said that they don't need understanding. I never said that at all. I was talking about people who self-diagnose and why that is morally wrong, and how I do feel there's a subtle but very significant difference linguistically between saying that you might be autistic and saying that you are autistic. It's a crucial but subtle distinction. Before anyone's diagnosed with anything, all they can say is that they might have the said condition. And that should be enough for other people to give them the support and understanding that they need. Because they said they might have this condition. That needs to be taken seriously. They might not have it, but they might have it. I agree, that needs to be taken seriously, and they need to be accepted, regardless of whether or not they've yet got the diagnosis. They need to be accepted as someone who might possibly have that condition. But for them to say that they definitely have that condition, to self-diagnose, because that's essentially what self-diagnosis is, isn't it? It's being certain about something. You know, they say, oh, I know in myself I am autistic, which to me is dishonest, because they are jumping the gun. They haven't yet received that medical diagnosis. Remember my logical syllogism. Medical diagnoses require a doctor to diagnose them. Autism is a medical diagnosis. Therefore, autism needs a doctor to diagnose it. Okay, I'm going to move over to video number 2 just to kind of, just a few more things I want to say. So moving over to video number 2 now.